So he said it was a great talk that you did, so we're really looking forward to it. And,
Okay, a lot to live up to now. Guys, thank you so much for coming down and for being here to listen. I know you guys are probably extremely busy, so the fact that you guys have all kind of made time to come down and listen to me waffle on for the next kind of hour or so is amazing. Thank you ever so much for that. So I'm just going to jump right in, really, because I can tell you lots of interesting stories from this adventure. So just to kind of introduce myself. So Peter Smart. I started my design business at the age of 15. So I'm 25 now, so that was 10 years ago. I probably thought I knew more back then than I actually think I know right now. So I was pretty naive, pretty arrogant, but I decided I'd go out and stick on a suit, walk down into town and not come back until I got clients. And now, somehow, I went from kind of this little upstart 15-year-old and I'm now working all around the world, getting to solve problems for really great brands and clients kind of all around the world in lots of different industries. And really, one of the main kind of catalysts to that happening was this particular project here. So this is called 50 Problems in 50 Days. Has anyone actually ever seen this project before? You've seen it before? Okay, if the rest of you it's completely new. Perfect, that's perfect. Okay, 50 Problems in 50 Days. So I traveled 2,500 miles around Europe to try and solve 50 problems in 50 days using design. So the first question I often get asked when I'm talking about this is, why on earth did you do that? It seems like a pretty ridiculous or ludicrous thing to do. And there's a number of reasons, really, as to why I did it. I think the main one, and you can kind of nod if you've heard of something similar to this before yourselves, okay? So in the design world, there's kind of a very kind of common argument that you might hear kind of bandied backwards and forwards if you head onto Twitter or kind of look at some of the design critique that's going on in the industry right now. But on the one hand, you have designers, and they tend to be quite young, naive designers, but they are designers nonetheless, and they say, designers are amazing. Who needs politicians or economists or healthcare workers when you have designers? Designers who can rethink healthcare systems and economies and currencies and systems of government and solve all of the world's problems. Design can change the world, yeah? And on the other hand, you have critics. Critics saying, how ridiculous, like how ridiculously arrogant is that? Designers should get off their high horse and do what they do best and make pretty artifacts. So it's this kind of quite strange argument that kind of goes backwards and forwards. And I found myself very much kind of in the middle of that. I was really kind of intrigued as to, well, what can design actually do to solve any sort of problems? You know, do you believe the critics who say, design can do nothing? Like, design is literally just about aesthetics and making something more beautiful, and the real problems are solved by the professionals. Or do you believe the people over here who say, do you know what, design and design thinking can offer revolutionary ways of looking at problems, and actually these old defunct systems need to be overwritten by new design thinkers who can come up with new systems of currency and healthcare and politics? So who do you believe? So I found myself in that situation, and I thought to myself, well, I could just kind of sit around and read about it, or I could try and put it to the test. So that's why I went out to do this adventure here. So I wanted to see and prove to myself, well, what could design actually do to solve problems, if at all? So I set myself a challenge, and my challenge was that for 50 consecutive days, I had to try and solve one problem each day. So that was made up of actually finding a problem to solve. So by observation, I couldn't just think of a problem and try and solve it. I had to actually observe a problem. I then had to try and solve it within that time period, and then actually kind of put the solution up on my blog that I was keeping. So 24-hour windows. Some days, my solutions were okay. Some days, my solutions sucked, they were terrible, I failed, and some days my solutions were great. But that really wasn't the point of the adventure. The point really wasn't to come up with amazing solutions every single day. It was to push myself out of my comfort zone and to test the limits of what I could do as a designer. It was more about process and stretching myself to be able to think harder and smarter and differently than it was anything about producing 50 incredible ideas off the back of this project. So what I'm going to do is just kind of talk to you about maybe some of these days. I'll maybe show you a couple, and then you can either shout out numbers between 1 and 50, which kind of tends to work sometimes, or you can kind of like offer up particular areas of interest that you might have. Because I tried to solve all kinds of problems, from really small problems like chewing gum on the floor on our high streets, getting hit by bicycles in Amsterdam, right the way up to stuff like homelessness in Turin. So a whole range of stuff, kind of with a lot kind of in between. So hopefully there'll be something in here where if there's an area that you're particularly interested in, I'll be able to maybe find an adjacent or a tangent problem that I tried to solve, and maybe I solved it and maybe I failed. But I'd love to kind of show you some of those. Does that sound okay? Yeah? Lots of nodding. This is good. Okay, fine. While I was doing this as well, I was very keen to kind of not just rely on my own wits, so to speak, and kind of my own thoughts about what design can actually do. So I also interviewed 12 of Europe's top design studios as well. I didn't make it as far north as Manchester, otherwise, of course, I would have been here. But my route took me up to London and then Paris, to Antwerp and Amsterdam, to Berlin, Munich, Zurich, Milan and Turin. And while I went through, I interviewed some of these kind of big agencies who were interested in what design can do to solve real-world problems, and I kind of got an industry insight into this as well. So there's a kind of a few different layers to this particular project. Okay, so I'm going to start by just showing you, I'm just going to pick a day at random here. Here we go. Let's go for this one. Why the heck not? Okay, so who's been to London recently? Most of you? Yeah? Everyone been to London? Yeah? Perfect, okay. Sometimes I speak to crowds who, some of them have never experienced the London Underground before. So you have to kind of explain, kind of, it's a regular thing to be kind of crammed into the London Underground. But this particular day, I was actually late for an interview. And I was running down the underground steps to get to the platform to jump onto, I think it was the Jubilee line or something like that. And I got to the platform, and the platform was just absolutely heaving, like absolutely heaving with passengers. There was just bodies everywhere. You couldn't even get near the platform. It was just hundreds of people kind of crammed into this little underground station. I'm looking around thinking, well, what on earth is going on? What on earth is going on here? And I looked up at the boards and realized that there was a delay. There was like a technical fault with the line, and so far fewer trains are actually coming into the platform at this kind of busy commuter time than actually there should have been. So I thought to myself, well, here's a problem to try and solve. This is kind of just, it's been landed right in my lap. Let's see what I can do to try and solve this problem using design. So being this kind of, you know, having started my business at 15 and kind of being fairly early on in this adventure, I was pretty confident that I had all of the necessary skills and techniques and requirements to be able to solve this problem hands down. Thank you very much. Give me an hour and I'll be able to be in the pub later on tonight, so kind of celebrating. That definitely wasn't the case. So I started by doing all kinds of stuff. So I observed. So this kind of classic design kind of technique. So I observed, I actually went out and kind of looked at the way people were using the space on the platform, how they were kind of interacting with people, how many kind of people were coming onto the platform and how many were actually leaving on the trains. I counted the number of trains that were coming in. I then analyzed as well. So I looked at the way that people were kind of interacting with each other, how they kind of stood on the platform. And I also then went around and interviewed people as well. I did some ethnographic research where I actually kind of went out and spoke to people and kind of got their thoughts and opinions on how they were finding this particular situation here on this sweaty platform, what would make it better for them, chief of which was just more trains, and what could be done to try and solve this particular problem. So I worked and I worked and I worked, and it was really, really hot down on the platform, and I worked for hours, and I just came up with nothing. Like absolutely nothing at all. And I just remember just being so disappointed in myself that I had made a fool of myself pretty much, going around and speaking to people saying, excuse me, do you mind if I just talk to you about this, this situation here? And had come up with absolutely nothing to kind of show for it. So I sat down on the steps that kind of led down to the platform and just, I don't know, maybe just gave up a little bit and thought, well, there's always going to be another problem later on in the day to try and solve. You know, I've not lost too much time, just a few hours. By this point, I had rearranged my interview for later on in the afternoon, so it was okay. And I sat there on the platform. As I did, the next train actually rolled into the station, and the doors opened. The trains were very, very busy, obviously, and passengers started to maybe trying to kind of get on, like fill up that remaining bit of space. And as they did, I suddenly heard this voice. Now, it wasn't the voice of God, but it was this voice, and it was down the other end of the platform, and it was booming. It was saying, move down, come on, move down. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? And I look up, and I see this big, like, burly conductor guy, and he's like right down, like where the yellow line is, like on the platform, just here, like shouting at commuters, shouting, move down, come on, like move down. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I'm not really sure what's going on here. I thought, well, I already look like a massive tool anyway. I mean, what have I got to lose by just going to speak to one more person? So I got up and I shuffled through like all the people, like sorry, sorry, pushed my way right to the front of the queue, and got to where this guy was stood. And I said, excuse me, mate, what seems to be the problem here? Like what's going on? And he said, we are having like technical problems on the line today. Like that's very kind of clear to see. But people just won't move down like the train. They won't get on the train. And I'm like, okay, it's a little bit weird. But as he and I were speaking, the next train actually rolled in behind us. And because I'd pushed my way all the way through all these people, I was now actually at the front of the queue. And really without thinking, I just like jumped on the train. And then the doors like slammed shut and we're suddenly moving. And I'm trying to like find something to hold on to that isn't like someone's hand or like putting my face into someone's like sweaty armpit. Like this is a horrendous experience. Struggling to find a place to stand, get myself balanced, hold on to something, and we're moving. I'm like, what have I just done? Okay, I'm on the train. Where are we going? And I looked down, and it was in that moment of actually getting on the train, looking around, that I actually understood the real problem. That you'll all experienced it. That when there is kind of lots of people on the train, people, instead of moving down and like using the remaining space, there's room for maybe like 10, 12 more people per carriage, like in every single train carriage that was there. But instead of moving down and filling up that middle space, they clustered by the door for fear of not being able to get off at their stop. So it meant that no more passengers could actually get on, and obviously then trains became much more congested and more people were late for work. So actually by getting on the train, I'd understood the real problem. No amount of kind of observation or analysis or talking to people in the station had led me to this conclusion. It was actually by physically me getting on and getting a face full of sweaty armpit that actually I was able to understand what was going on here. So I got off at the next platform and I thought, okay, well, here we go. I've got my insight. Now let's try and work from here. So I started coming up with solutions. Now, my first solution was terrible, like really bad. And it was to repurpose the opening and closing of the train door. So just imagine those doors opening and closing, and the idea being that it says, move closer together, reduce congestion, and it felt like something that Boris Johnson would put out rather than really a viable solution to anything. So I came up with this thing, I kind of designed it up and looked at it and I thought, do you know what, Pete, you could probably do better. You could probably, you could stop, but you could probably do better. So I kept going and I went back to the drawing board. And instead of just thinking kind of in a very literal way about the problem, and instead of thinking about, I don't know, kind of public service messaging as the obvious solution, I tried to think what it was actually like to be on that train and actually remind myself of that experience, actually kind of being on the train, actually kind of this being an experience that wasn't particularly comfortable, but very functional. And I thought to myself, well, how could I actually encourage people to use space like more effectively? How could I encourage people to move down the train, to use that space so that more people can get on, and then we limit the number of people who are late for work because more people can actually get onto these trains. But how do you actually solve it? And I thought to myself, well, what if rather than being told to do something, what if actually it was something which you wanted to do? Like you actually wanted to engage with this, you actually wanted to move down. So I thought about play, and I thought about ways that you could make it a participatory user action. So rather than something that you're forced to do, actually something that you want to do. And eventually what I came up with and kind of tried was this. So I turned the Underground into a game of Monopoly. So as you cross the threshold, you cross go. And then rather than standing in the corner in jail, you're encouraged to move down towards Mayfair and kind of stand in the middle. Now, this particular solution is okay. It's fun. It's a playful way of looking at a very functional problem. But interestingly, it's been one of the most shared and most discussed days from across the 50 Problems adventure. It's actually had people wanting to actually implement this in various kind of pilot studies around Europe, which is really interesting. And it's just, I think, because it's a playful way of solving a very functional, very dry problem. And I think maybe there is some kind of overlap in potentially some of the work that you guys do that for the outside world, pharma, healthcare, might be perceived to be a little bit dry. But I think it's our job as creatives to maybe kind of rethink those paradigms a little bit and think about how can we as creatives inject some creativity and rethink these kind of normal ways of doing things to actually create things which actually inspire people, which actually encourage people, which actually kind of get to what they want to do rather than what they're being told to do or advised to do by their doctors. So I think that's kind of a lesson to kind of take away from this, is that our job as creatives is to kind of rethink like these paradigms, is to rethink the relationship that we have with the end consumer. It wasn't actually by me going out and doing a whole bunch of like talking to people which inspired this kind of solution. It wasn't by observing. You know, I think that a lot of design thinkers, a lot of kind of designers and creatives, that's their natural kind of default. And that kind of our research, our understanding of people's problems is maybe what we read. So if we're trying to understand a particular health problem that we're trying to design something for, we might read about the condition, for example, and that might inform our design. But what I discovered on this day and throughout the entire adventure is that actually empathy and understanding and the best solutions are actually born out of real empathy, and that's actually kind of putting yourself in the shoes of those people. Be it as stupid as actually jumping onto a train full of sweaty people and understanding that real problem for what it was, or actually going and sitting down with people who are out of work and out of luck and trying to understand that problem more innately and more deeply. It could be really, really simple and it could be really, really complex. But my encouragement to designers wherever I go now is to try and find ways to really empathize with your users. Like if we were to think about, the best problem that someone ever solved for you. If you were to think about that just for a second, that the best problem that someone ever solved for you, like the best solution to a problem that you had, it's often because that person was able to solve that problem for you and so well and so memorably is because they really understood you, they really understood your problem, they really understood the depth and the breadth of the problem, not at a surface level, and therefore what they offered, their solution, was that much more better. It got right to the core of the issue rather than dealing with it at the surface level. So my encouragement to you is try as best as you can to understand the full breadth of whoever you are designing for, be it for users for a particular app that you're creating or a campaign